It's springtime in Toronto. The city has awakened from its icy sleep. Horns blast, bare limbs unfurl from puffy coats, and sometimes I see ghosts in the windows. Everything is on the move. I crave the sun and the outside, but no matter where I venture or what I'm doing, no matter the traffic, brutal and relentless and glacier, after a long day, I cannot wait to go home. I ended the last one word, Dada, by promising my daughter I'll always be there when she's ready to return home. But what do I mean when I say home? One of the most treasured possessions I have is a book, Origins, by Eric Partridge. I start each one word by following his journey back through the lineages and etymologies for a clue, a forgotten artifact of meaning. Home was no different. Partridge discovered 3 distinct meanings for the word home, and the first is Old English, ham, house with land. No goal in my life has been more pervasive and all-consuming than the quest for a house with land. When my parents were my age, they succeeded in this quest. They bought 1.5 acres in Aiken, South Carolina, and built a home. This was my childhood, a Canadian living in the USA. I remember crunchy beds of pine needles in the yard, and that I rarely entered the house from the front door. Having moved from a small duplex in Toronto, the living room felt like a royal chamber. We had a backyard with a pool, a deck, and a den above the garage. Our neighbors were friendly and forthcoming in that classical American way. All of this exists for me now as memories spooled on videotape. The Aiken home left an impression, indelible, like a dimple thumbed into my cheek. It's become the origin of my quest for a house with land. But in Toronto, the cost of housing ballooned over the pandemic, and that once affordable dream feels out of reach. At 36 years old, I cannot provide my daughter what my parents provided me, and I've had to accept the fact that what my parents had, I may never have. To afford the modest townhome we're in now, my wife and I had to get a mortgage with her sister. 5 years later, the house we purchased is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars more than when we bought it, but every other house has risen in value too. I have friends with lucrative careers that struggle to pay their mortgage. Real estate in Canada confounds even the experts. The news cycle has dubbed this problem the housing crisis.
He faces a housing crisis. Housing crisis.
We're currently facing an unprecedented housing affordability and supply crisis.
No one knows how to fix this crisis. Some say we need more housing, and there does seem to be a lot of new builds. I see city notices for condo construction projects everywhere. Developers tear down old landmarks to erect glass towers. Sometimes they leave the shell of what once was, like a Roman ruin. Cranes entangle the cityscape like a spider's web, cutting my dreams of ever escaping. Every day after work, I pass a condo project on King Street designed by renowned Canadian architect Frank Gehry. Condominiums are traditionally cheaper than homes, so I wanted to know how much an apartment costs here. I phoned 3 times. No one answered. The phone just rang and rang endlessly. So I did some digging online and discovered a 600 square foot apartment costs $1 million. But no matter if I own or rent or live with my parents, the basic elements of a home stay the same: walls, floors, ceilings, that safeguard me from the world. To make the space I live in feel more like home, I must leave the safety of inside and journey outside into the world. Which brings me to the second definition Partridge discovered for the word home. Old Norse, heimer, meaning world or village. The Inglewood Antique Market contains countless items from what I would consider my village, Caledon, Ontario. I've visited this store for years, sometimes with an idea of what I want, and at other times bringing nothing more with me but a feeling, a desire, with no name. And I love this store. The creaking of old wood joists underfoot, the chirping of spring hatchlings in the rafters, and John's warm hello as I enter the front door.
I'm Jon Medley, owner of Inglewood Antique Market.
And how long have you had this place?
Well, I've been a dealer here since it opened. I was one of the first dealers here like 30 years ago, but I took it over about 5 years ago now. And but there's kind of been a lack of interest in antiques for the last 10, 15 years, partially because the older generation that appreciated this stuff and had china cabinets filled with stuff, they're now downsizing, going to condos, smaller places, and they're getting rid of their stuff, and the younger generation basically doesn't want china cabinets filled with stuff. They have a different eye. So
Jon is an alchemist specializing in the elements that make up a home: trinkets, tables, chairs. The pieces that arrive in his store are special because they've come from other homes from my village. Nothing here is new. I will find no shrink wrap or cardboard. I do not assemble. I discover. And in that discovery, learn something about myself.
like it's like digging for treasure, really. And that's why some of those shows, like those Storage Wars shows, that's why they're so popular. Because they always go to commercial when they're open up a box and they go, whoa, look at that, and then they cut to commercial. Well, going through a store like this, and I hear it when people come in, and they'll go, wow, look at that, and they just see something that catches their eye, and hearing their response is kind of cool. You see stuff, even if you don't buy it, you might see something that your grandmother had, and you go, oh God, I remember my grandmother having one of those, and it'll bring back a memory. A nice memory of being in grandma's house, it brings back feelings, and sometimes feelings of home.
Yeah. In 2020, I wanted to write the way Don DeLillo writes, and I learned that his technique relied on a typewriter. I found one at Jon's Antique Market. I spent years writing slow and tedious drafts on the Smith Corona. Without discovering this typewriter and bringing it back home, one word would not exist. But oftentimes, when I'm looking for something, I don't make the trip to Jon's store. Instead, I order what I need from IKEA. I admitted this to Jon, and he thought for a few moments and then said,
It's because we have to work so hard in order to be able to afford our mortgages, and both couples are working, and in most cases, and you've got to pay for your mortgage, you've got to pay for your car, you have all these overheads, and then a lot of times you get home and you just want to relax, and just, you don't really want to go out, so that because you're so stressed from that constant barrage of having to work and having to do things. So you don't, that free time, you're a lot more careful with it. So if you can do it online in the comfort of your couch when you get home, it's the easy solution for a lot of people. But it's just a shame, because a lot of small businesses are going away because of that.
When I chat with Jon, it's easy to fall under his spell of knowledge of art styles. We talked a little about the relationship between history and furniture. His thoughts on Art Deco, for example, fascinated me.
King Tut, his tomb was discovered in the 20s, which was right around the time that Art Deco was becoming a movement, right? Because the Paris Exposition, I think, was like 1923 or somewhere in the early 20s. So King Tut came out, world phenomenon. Everybody was like, it affected the whole world discovering King Tut. So, of course, everything being created at the time is going to be influenced by Egyptian history. So if you look at some like early Art Deco stuff, you'll see Egyptian influences in it, and it's fantastic. I absolutely love that stuff.
And finally, sitting upstairs, listening to the birds above and the footsteps of shoppers below, he told me what comes to mind when he thinks of home.
Home is like your safety net. You know, home is like where if you get in trouble at school, you get home, everything's okay. You know, mom's there. If you've got a nice home life, you know, if you've got a good home life, for sure, it makes a difference. But home is, it's that safe ground. And you when you're home, you're comfortable. It's like you're in your mom's womb, kind of. And it's like the connection to your mom is so strong as well. I think that bond never leaves. I think there's an invisible umbilical cord there your entire life. And it's like, for me, I kind of associate mom with home, you know? 100%. Yeah.
Talking with Jon, I found myself imagining a world not too far into the future where the increase in the cost of living and the ever-shortening of my time means nothing in my home reflects who I am. I have no personal connection to my paintings and desks and lights. Suddenly, my village is gone. The walls surrounding me are the same walls I see everywhere, and the rooms I enter could lead anywhere. We've arrived at Partridge's final definition for the word home. The Sanskrit kayati, which means where he lies down. I spent some time in a graveyard this month, staring at the headstones and the little gifts left behind for the dead. Even though it's where my body will exist the longest, I don't enjoy thinking about my final resting place. It's a bad omen, a morbid curiosity. Somehow, talking about coffins and burials shortens my lifespan, not unlike smoking a cigarette. But a lack of clarity means it would be up to my family, my wife or my daughter, to take care of the arrangements. Whatever they decided, there'd always be a lingering question, is this what he would have wanted? I know this from experience. Ever since my dad passed away, my mom has held on to his ashes, and he's followed us from home to home. Right now, he lies down under my mom's insignia television. Until I was working on the word home, I never thought about mom's responsibility of keeping dad's remains. It's been over 15 years, and in many ways, she's moved on with her life. We've never talked about where he should go, and if we don't start thinking about it, one day both of my parents will be in bronze containers, and my brother and I will be left carrying them from room to room. He has to go somewhere, And realizing that my mom has had him ever since he died, I started wondering if things would change if I took him home. So on a recent visit to Orangeville, I asked her. So I was wondering if I could take Dad's ashes home.
Yeah.
You okay with that?
No, yeah, that's fine.
So I was
He'd like to go and visit, see the baby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you've had him for this whole time, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No, you can take him home.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Mom and I talked about why we left South Carolina, and she said that it was partly because, even back then, more than 10 years before Dad was diagnosed with cancer, he didn't feel well.
He was sick, and he didn't. I don't think he really knew it, but he didn't know how bad or what. He just wasn't well, and I think then he decided that he better come home, right? Mm-hmm. And then because we had health insurance down there, but in the end, I think we would have gone through the $2 million pretty easy.
Off camera, after our little interview, my mom started to talk about where she would want to be buried. I realized that holding onto his ashes is this symbolic act, that we're carrying him with us. We haven't left him behind, and in some ways, maybe we haven't moved forward. But either way, it was time for me to take him home. When I returned home, I thought about where to put him. The urn is heavy, so an IKEA floating shelf wasn't ideal. Dad had spent enough time under a television. I remember that he loved watching movies with his sons, so I decided on the table opposite the TV so he could watch. Hey Dad, welcome home. I promised my daughter I'll always be there when she's ready to return home. While making this one word, I realized that's something my dad promised me. I used to be so angry at him because I believed he didn't keep his promise. He could have done more, I thought. Done more to stay alive. Couldn't he have eaten healthier, drank less, seen a doctor sooner? 16 years after his death, and he's here. In the writing I find, the images, the urn, he kept his promise. By making these videos, I'm trying my best to keep my promise. I may never own a big house with land. The small businesses that strengthen villages are dying, and graves are terribly expensive. So I'm building a home for my daughter out of images and music and words. It'll always be there for her. She can visit anytime she wants. All she has to do is open the door.